Okay, so we talked a little about mobile. So when we want to install a radio in a car and make it a mobile radio, and there's people that put base stations in their car. It doesn't have to be actually manufactured as a mobile radio. You can either have a permanent or a temporary installation. If you're going to make it permanent, you need to make sure how you run it to make connections up to the battery, whether the battery's in the front or the back. So you need to run heavy, just like the base station, heavy gauge wire up to both terminals of the battery. And typically, the power cable that comes with your radio, whether it's a mobile or a base station, they're usually like maybe 10 feet or so. You might need a longer one. They typically have built-in fuses on both the positive and the negative. And I'm not sure I can explain why it's important to have it on the negative, but it seems to be a safety thing that is recommended, that both of the lines are fused, particularly in a car.
Yeah.
So you want to have those direct lines up to the battery terminals, and you also want to have really make sure that the negative, at least in the United States, the negative terminal of the battery is got a good ground connection to the chassis of the car, and that your radio has a good ground connection to the chassis. So where should the negative power return of a mobile transceiver be connected in a vehicle?
To the terminals.
Like I said, most of the radios are designed to run off of 13.8 volts. So you can run them off of a 12-volt battery. And that's what people do when they go out and do POTA or QRP, go out to a park, and they run off of a battery. So if you are running off of a battery, you need to figure out how long you're going to be able to operate. So you determine what the average current draw is when you're operating, because if you're just in receive mode, your radio is only going to draw maybe an amp or 2 amps. When you're in transmit mode, it might be drawing 10 or 20 amps. But the transmit to receive ratio is usually pretty low. So you probably wouldn't even figure a 10 amp average, but you kind of have to guesstimate based on your activity what that average current is. And then knowing the amp hour rating of your battery, you just divide that and it'll tell you how many hours you can probably operate. So in the case of like a little 5-watt QRP radio with a typical 10 amp hour battery, the kind like you use in the UPSs and emergency lighting, things like that, you can operate for 10 hours. You probably wouldn't operate for 10 hours, especially around here when the mosquitoes come out.
Oh, no.
So how can you determine the length of time that equipment can be powered from a battery?
Bravo.
Okay. Some things about operating controls on your transceiver. Some of these you won't have on a handy talkie, but they will be on most base station transceivers or on some mobile radios. And one of the main ones is to adjust your microphone gain. And it'll be a setting in the radio. I think they normally come defaulted to about 50%. In most cases, I think you probably want to reduce it down to maybe around 30. It kind of depends on your setup and whether you're using digital modes or you're just doing like single sideband voice. But you just kind of have to find a good setting where you're not getting any distortion because you're overdriving the transmitter. Or if it's too low, you're not getting enough modulation, so you're putting out a very weak signal.
So then it's the person on the other end of the radios don't really hear you clearly. Is that right?
Right.
Is that what difficult copy is?
Right. So either way, if it's too high, they're going to have trouble because you're going to have distorted audio. And if it's too low, you're going to have very weak audio.
How do you know that it's too high or too low? Or do you have to wait for somebody to give you feedback?
Feedback plus you can, a lot of times you can turn a monitor function on.
Turn what on?
Monitor.
Oh, okay. Oh, gotcha.
It's not actually monitoring your transmitted signal, but it's monitoring the audio that's going in.
Okay.
The other thing is tuning. Obviously, you've got to set the frequency correctly. And if you're doing FM, if you're in VFO mode where you're actually tuning the frequency as opposed to one of the memory channels where it's fixed, you'll get distorted audio if you're above or below the right frequency. And that's also true if you're doing AM or single sideband. Usually to set an operating frequency, if you have a radio, and most of them do have memory, where you can store these things as channels, you can pick you can input the frequency with a keypad entry, or you can just tune it with the VFO and do a store into a particular memory channel, and then you recall it if you want to, and you can usually just scan through the memory locations you've got stored. Sometimes you'll have a display on the radio and you can actually see a list of them and just pick one.
Is the punch the number in a keypad and rotate those are two different ways of doing it, like on a radio,
right?
Like
and
on my car radio.
If it's a handy talkie, you're going to have a little keypad and have to do it.
Yeah.
Or
but they're an either or, right? It's either or.
Well, even on the handy talkie, you can still do it with the VFO and store it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you don't do both. You don't do one first and then the other, or you could do that too.
Are these just three different ways of being able to set the frequency?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for translating.
Well, there's actually a fourth.
But you're still saying that like 1 and 2 are interchangeable. You can do it either way.
You can do all 3.
Okay.
Yeah, you can mix and match. Punch in a number, and then if it was just a little off the number for some reason, you could rotate the VFO knob.
Yes.
Get you in the neighborhood.
Yes.
First, and then you'd say, okay, that's it. Store it in a memory channel.
Usually, when you're doing FM, you're going to be doing it from stored channels. So you don't have to fool with the knob.
You'd be surprised what I do in my car to avoid figuring out how to put things in the memory channel and whatnot.
Well, and a lot of these handy talkies, it's very hard to program it manually. So like I said, there's a fourth way, and it's with programming software, where you connect your computer up to the handy talkie or the radio, and you program the channels and frequencies and things you want, and then you basically upload it to the radio. It's probably the easiest way to do it. And usually, you know, you'll take something like the repeater directory and input all of the repeater channels that are in your area or in places where you might be traveling to.
Gotcha.
When my friend gave me a little handy transceiver, he gave it to me with a printed out list of things I might, of frequencies I might ever, or rather targets that I might ever go to. And then I think the Weather Channel for Melbourne and something else that would be likely that I would use. So he kind of handed it to me. So all I had to figure out to start with was how to go between those two things that he'd loaded.
Yeah.
Which was thoughtful, I thought.
Yeah, you can listen to that weather broadcast. It's an automated thing, and it just keeps repeating the same information until it changes. Actually, and when they have a special bulletin, because it happened to me yesterday, coming back, I had the radio in the car on, and all of a sudden it switched to the weather broadcast with a flood warning alert.
Yep.
Okay, another thing that most radios have is a scanning function, handy talkies as well. So it allows you to scan or tune through a range of frequencies. In most cases, you can set the start and stop frequency, and it'll just sit there and continually run through them until it finds a signal, and it'll stop there, which gives you a chance if you want to stop the scan and listen to that signal. So what is the effect of microphone gain on single sideband transmissions?
What is the effect? Oh, Bravo.
What's the result of tuning an FM receiver above or below a signal's frequency?
Distortion of the audio?
Delta, yeah.
Good guess. Which of the following can be used to enter a transceiver's operating frequency?
Alpha, definitely.
Okay. Although Delta was sort of interesting too. But Alpha. Yay.
Yeah. We didn't talk about CTCSS or DTMF yet.
Yeah, right.
Well, actually, we did talk about DTMF, but it has nothing to do with this. And automatic frequency control, some radios will have an AFC, and it will try to keep your radio on frequency if you're like in FM or AM. What is a way to enable quick access to a favorite frequency or channel on your transceiver?
Bravo.
Bravo.
What does the scanning function of an FM transceiver do?
Charlie.
Charlie. Checks for messages on the bulletin board.
Oops.
Another control or function is squelch. Most handy talkies also have it, although I did run into one I worked on for a guy who it didn't have a individual squelch control. It was automatic, and you had to program some level for it, which was a real pain. In most cases, it has a knob, and you can adjust the squelch. And what squelch does is it adjusts the level that's required of the signal to actually generate the audio. In other words, it blanks the signal until it gets up to a high enough level, whatever the squelch is set to. So if your squelch is down low, you're going to hear all kinds of noise and static, even though there's nobody talking there's no signal. So you adjust the squelch control up until the radio basically all of a sudden becomes silent. And then when you get a signal that's stronger than that level you've set, I mean, you'll hear that audio. Now, one of the so-called disadvantages when you do that is if you have some very weak signals, you might have the squelch signal high enough that you'll never hear that weak signal. So if you're really looking for like DX and weak signals, you probably have to have a little bit of noise coming in. But that's really the whole purpose of it, is just to blank out the background noise that's going to be there. Actually, well, there's somebody talking right now.
Not really well. Okay, why don't you send the message again? Okay, import in. Sending now.
Bravo.
Oh yeah, it's definitely Bravo. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to turn the squelch off. That's how that works. How is squelch adjusted so that a weak FM signal can be heard?
Oh, this is culture so that we can be heard. Oh, you have to turn it off. So which one is that? Alpha.
No.
Setting an FL rig that was forcing it into FM-digital.
Can you go back to that just a second? I didn't quite understand the question.
It was kind of backwards written.
Yeah, how is squelch just so the weak FM signal? Oh, okay. That's what
I think the answer is a little backwards.
Yeah, well, I missed the weak.
Yeah.
Of course, that assumes there's no strong signal, because if you remember, we talked about the capture effect.
Signal capture, right?
FM. So if there's a strong signal close by, you'll never hear the weak.
Right. Okay.
With FM transceivers, particularly when really only when we're talking to through repeaters, there's a frequency offset. Sometimes they call it repeater offset. sometimes on your radio, it will show up as a DUP or dupe. And what that means is there's a difference in frequency between the frequency you transmit on and the frequency you receive on. In the case of VHF repeaters, that's going to be either a plus or minus 600 kilohertz. In the case of a UHF repeater, it's going to be plus or minus 5 megahertz. So an example is for the N1 KSC repeater that's out on the VAB, you listen to that on 444.925 megahertz. When you transmit to that repeater, you're transmitting on 449.925 or up 5 megahertz. And that's what that, when it shows up on the display on the radio, that dupe means. It'll either have a plus or a minus dupe, which means you're above or below. And because they're fixed amounts, you know that it's either 5 megahertz on UHF or 600 kilohertz on VHF. And when you program your radio for a repeater, that's one of the things that you have to program in, is the repeater offset. So what is meant by repeater offset?
Alpha.
Alpha.
Let's see. We talked about connecting up to a battery in the car, but you want to have a good negative return to the battery chassis ground. And usually in most cars, that's going to be a fairly heavy gauge braided strap that goes straight to the chassis from the battery, and it's usually short. So either directly at the battery or where that connects to the chassis. It's usually easier to get to the battery. You determine how long you can operate if you're running off a battery by estimating the average current draw and then dividing into the ampere rating. On transceivers, you need to set your microphone gain in the right range. You need to try to tune correctly, or you're going to get some distortion. We talk about different ways that you can actually program the operating frequency or set the operating frequency on your radio. And scanning.